Hello, good evening, and welcome back. It seems as if the BLM movement has now started a proxy war against statues, as we see retaliation happening in Bristol, with Alfred Fagon's statue has been damaged by some corrosive substance. Not knowing whether it's been permanently damaged, doesn't know who's done it either because they didn't make a public thing of it. Of course, the people who took down Edward Colston's statue all filmed, and the police let it happen. Because although being a philanthropist and responsible for making Bristol what it is today, as I've mentioned previously, they did it in full view of the police, and the police let it happen because he's just remembered as a slave trader now. Whereas Alfred Fagon was the first black man to have a statue put up in his honour, and this has now been attacked. It could very well be a false flag, could be a hoax hate crime, who knows. The narrative is that it's essentially a proxy war on damage to statues, which obviously isn't what we want. Ideally, we wouldn't have any of it, but if statues get harmed instead of people, if that's the full extent of it, then if we can pull things back from there and say, right, you've made your point, you've done something that is emblematic of what you're trying to push, then that's okay, as long as then we don't hurt other people. Although we're already seeing that start to happen, as the Met Police now have imposed conditions ahead of anti-racism protests. And in this article, they do admit the communist ties of BLM, which is essentially a feminist movement now. It's putting the women first, and they want bigger government, but it's got to be their government. They've got to stamp out anybody who doesn't agree with them, despite, of course, being given a load of benefit already, as we've seen in case of the statues. One was done in broad daylight with the police not doing anything. The other was done discreetly, making sure that police and nobody knew what was going on. Because, of course, if you're defaming someone who's black, you will get the full force of the law. If it's against somebody who is white, nobody really cares. Unless the perpetrator is black and the victim is black, in which case, again, nobody really cares, because you can't acknowledge that. Because otherwise you're then saying that the black person is also bad. So they kind of balance each other out, and that's why there's not a lot to talk about the black on black crime. And of course, Sargon's got a new shirt out, which is trying to help get a more positive aspect of the black community, if you will, to say Black Fathers Matter, because that is a key point in enabling the children to grow up with a male role model in order to then become contributing members of society, form a cohesive social structure with friends, and also a solid family foundation for their generation and future generations beyond them. As was done previously in the 50s, for example, when, although poverty was worse in black neighborhoods, that you didn't have any worse crime. In fact, it was a lot calmer. So we'll have to see how that plays out now that the so-called oppressed are, of course, the oppressors. But the police, and of course, was Sadiq Khan basically saying, we don't want the far right to get involved, of course, on, as they mentioned on LBC with James Brown, to say, okay, with that in mind, let's try and segregate them. We're going to have the far left segregated from the far right. We're going to have the black supremacists away from the white supremacists. That is the narrative I think they're trying to paint, but I'm not sure, because at this point the right-left distinction is not really accurate. If you're going with BLM as far left and you're saying communists, and if you're saying far right, anarchists, is that what you mean? Basically, people who want to use state force and say you have to do this or we will kill you are being pushed back by people who are saying we want to do our own thing and we want the freedom to do that and we won't tell you what to do. Is that what far right is then? Far right is now just libertarian. That seems to be the state of play. So, as the police have said, Met Commander Bashjavid said, "We're asking you not to come to London and let your voices be heard in other ways." They say the police said the demonstrations were on the whole peaceful. However, there were dozens of arrests and 27 police officers were injured. This was from last weekend, of course. The new conditions set out on the Met's website apply to BLM and to left and right-wing groups that have notified the force of their intention to demonstrate on Saturday. Restrictions include a specific route for Black Lives Matter demonstrators between Hyde Park and Trafalgar Square, where they will be permitted to assemble until 5. Similar regulations apply to right-wing groups, require them to assemble in Parliament Square and some parts of Whitehall, again until 5. So, although they try and draw the distinction here to Black Lives Matter, 1, left, 2, right, 3 different groups, they're then saying we've got restrictions for the Black Lives Matter demonstrators and restrictions for right-wing groups. Would you like to hazard a guess as to where the left-wing groups fit into this? The Met said police officers routinely talk to organisers before and during an event to minimise disruption and disorder, and often you need some sort of licence or allowance in order to take these demonstrations in order for them to be legal. Policing demonstrations is complex and challenging, not least during a global health crisis. We will continue to police any protest with the aim of keeping people safe and preventing crime and disorder. A Black Lives Matter demonstration took place in central London on Friday evening, with leaders of the march urging those in attendance to keep the demonstration peaceful and not to join any anti-racism rallies planned for the weekend. Good, if true, good. That is definitely what we wish to pursue. We wish to say, take responsibility for your own actions. Maintain peace, maintain civility, try and get your points across in a way that can be understood by people, in a way that gets them to think about it, instead of just saying, no, we don't like you because you're violent and thuggish. And like him or loathe him, but probably like him, Mark Collett, I think, has learned this, and he's got this down pretty solidly with the patriotic alternative, that the idea behind it is to say that, yes, we do have a dress code, we do have civility here, because we are not just a nationalist party that you can write off as being aggressive and simple, but instead we do have much higher standards and things that we require of our members in order to be more civilized and to say things across in a way that is far more socially acceptable, in a way that cannot be framed as if we're thugs and brutes, and instead we are people who can hold a civil dialogue, a civil discussion. We can disagree with you, you can disagree with us, and that'll all be perfectly fine. We would just like to have the opportunity to be able to speak and have our groups meeting together. We're not trying to hurt anybody. We're not trying to give the impression we're trying to hurt anybody. We just want to be able to speak and then let things be decided democratically. So with that in mind, of course, you don't see the patriotic alternative groups ending up with attacks on police. Whereas you do here with the Black Lives Matter. And this then, of course, goes back to Black Fathers Matter, because the reason being they don't have respect for authority, fathers were never there, they don't respect the police, and they go to gang culture instead. Very straightforward. So, as Churchill and Parliament Square was boarded up to protect it from potential damage, we've also seen other statues, including Nelson's column, trying to be protected, because whenever you go back in history, you can link something somehow to someone and therefore brand them as bad for an action which they may or may not be loosely related to somehow, and therefore hold it against them. And that is also why you'll see that apologies are never good enough. You can never bow to the mobs, because the purity spirals will always take a darker turn and it will never be enough. However, they've tried to appease them, as other monuments have been removed ahead of separate protest plans over the weekend, while the Cenotaph War Memorial in Whitehall has also been covered. In Poole, Dorset, a statue of Scouts Movement founder Robert Baden-Powell is to be cladded instead of removed. Yes, so including the Cenotaph War Memorial. So people who wish to desecrate the memory of people who defended the country to make it what it is today against far-left parties, whether that be communists, socialists, national socialists, fascists, any of them, the ones who put them down, you would have thought people like Antifa, who are trying to blend in with BLM as well, would respect that. But no, because the people who were fighting actual Nazis are now the actual Nazis. So Mayor London Sadiq Khan said other key statues, including one of Nelson Mandela, would be protected, because everyone's a target now. Demonstrations have been taking place across the world, as we know, following the death and police custody of George Floyd in Minneapolis last month. That is actually a statement of fact. That isn't a biased statement. Yes. Well done. I I must applaud the BBC. They've actually said something straight about George Floyd's death. He died in police custody. That's completely correct. So the PM piped in. While he understood legitimate feelings of outrage at Mr. Floyd's death, the only responsible course of action was to stay away from these protests. Prime Minister said the demonstrations had been hijacked by extremists intent on violence. He added that whatever people's feeling about the cause, they should not support a demonstration which in all probability would end in deliberate and calculated violence. Well, bear in mind, why is this happening in the first place? It's because they wish to disband the police. There are no systemic changes you can make unless it comes down to black superiority, in which case it's lording your desire over somebody else's through use of force. So, from the get-go, it was always about violence and subjugation. It's always been about that. The legitimate feelings of outrage are just that there isn't black supremacy, because they're already favoured under the law. What else do you need? But fine, apparently we're supposed to pretend, yeah, they've actually got valid things that they're concerned about. It's like, what? Oh, well, British people used to own slaves. Well, Britain also ended the slave trade and stopped it happening in Africa. I mean, sure, we've got some work to do in the Middle East, but remind me how you feel about intervention in the Arabic world. Is that okay now? Because we're stopping slavery. Places like Sudan. Is that okay? If we go have another crusade against Islam in order to stop their slavery practices, have we got your support then? Because they are taking black people and castrating them. What about in China? If we then go out to them, because of course they're subjugating the Uyghurs out there and putting them into their detention camps, as they say, and organ harvesting, of course, because they're more healthy, just like the Falun Gong practitioners. Is that then okay if we're saying that the Chinese Communist Party is bad, or is that not okay because they're communist? Where does the line fall? It seems to be not on any principle. It's just might is right. It's just, if we can lord our power over you, then we will do so. We need you to cower before us and give us everything that we can. We're not going to go against anybody who's actually doing anything bad because they are too strong for us. And we're already seeing that in America, where the police can't take control of the riots, that you've got civilian militias being set up, and that is, again, where the safer areas are. You've got more people with more guns, trained how to use them, not afraid to use them, and because that is widespread knowledge, the rioters are not going there because they know they will get shot. So, if the answer is less police, then it's just going to have to be civilian militias, and I can guarantee you, as always, that if the left wants to start a race war, they will lose. They've been in their bubbles and echo chambers too much that they don't realise how harsh and unforgiving the real world is, as they say, and that you can scream at a tree as long as you want, but unless you start hitting it with an axe, it's not going to be chopped down. You've actually got to do something tangible where the facts don't care about your feelings, and even though you might really wish for something to happen, unless you take action to achieve it, it's not going to happen. And I think that's the biggest disconnect between the left and the right. So, until next time, do stay away from London. Do keep yourself safe. Tommy Robinson isn't going there, of course, because the Democratic Football Lads Alliance will, of course, be smeared again, even though they are against all extremism and racism, as they've now added on. That, of course, anything like that, anything with Tommy Robinson, he'll apparently be far right. So, he's not including himself, and I recommend that for everybody else as well, to not go there. Yes, I know that you want to counter-protest the Black Lives Matter movement. Honestly, we all do. We don't appreciate racial supremacists, white, black, Chinese, whatever it might be. We really don't. But unfortunately, the government, the media in the UK do prefer the non-whites than the whites. And therefore, if you do try and stand up for equality, you will be hounded as a racist for suggesting that black people have their own agency and you want equal treatment under the law. That is now a radical act. Speaking truth is the radical act. So until next time, stay safe and have a good one.